As Rebecca Sloan staggered out from the edge of the Henderson industrial area on a cold, gray morning, she was barely recognizable. Gaunt face, torn and filthy clothes, body trembling as if she had just escaped from a place not meant for humans. The nurse who had been missing for 2 years since her final shift at UMC Las Vegas, the one the entire city had assumed was no longer alive, was now standing there, gasping for breath as though she had just fled from something horrifying. But the most terrifying thing wasn't her appearance. The most terrifying thing was what she said about those 2 years. About what happened inside that metal warehouse. And about the people who are still out there operating. Some names and details have been changed to protect identities and privacy. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In the early hours of May 14, 2022, the east parking lot of University Medical Center in Las Vegas lay under pale artificial light, unusually quiet as Rebecca Sloan, 28-year-old emergency department nurse, finished her shift at 1:47 a.m. and walked out of the building. Just like on the many long shifts before, she turned into the open-air corridor connecting the treatment area and the staff parking lot, a path that opened onto the Nevada desert at night, still holding the day's leftover heat and crossed by dry, fleeting winds that carried an almost indescribable stillness. Rebecca, who grew up in the somewhat sheltered environment of the Denver suburbs and had moved to Las Vegas to work at UMC, saw nursing as an inseparable routine from her life, and finishing work near 2 a.m. was no longer unfamiliar to her. According to later statements from several security staff, Rebecca appeared completely normal, neat clothing, tired but steady posture, no signs of stress or anxiety. She walked while holding her phone, trying to finish a short call with her mom to confirm that her shift had ended, and she was about to drive back to her apartment in Spring Valley. As she stepped down into the parking lot, Rebecca approached her silver sedan parked in the usual spot. Security cameras clearly captured her movements, opening the passenger trunk to place her bag, checking her keys again, and standing beside the car door for a few seconds. But in the next moment, the footage recorded one striking detail. Rebecca turned her head toward the far edge of the lot, where the light faded and the camera could no longer capture clearly. No one knows what made her pause or who was standing just outside the frame, but Rebecca's reaction showed she was drawn to something unusual. After a few seconds, Rebecca moved away from the spot still within the camera's view and stepped into the darkness, completely disappearing from recording without any further easily identifiable action. There was no loud sound, no sudden movement, and no witnesses reported seeing any strangers in the area at that time. To the security cameras, Rebecca's disappearance happened in absolute silence, as if she simply stepped out of the boundary of light and never came back. By the next morning, when Rebecca didn't return home, and also didn't show up for her next shift, her family began calling her repeatedly, but the phone was off. A coworker stopped by her apartment out of concern, but found no sign that anyone had entered or left since the previous evening. Her car was not at UMC. Her personal accounts showed no new transactions, and her phone could no longer be located. Faced with prolonged, total loss of contact, completely contrary to Rebecca's usual habits, her family went straight to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department to report her missing. This officially marked the disappearance of Rebecca Sloan. No note left behind, no trace left behind, and no piece of evidence to help her family or authorities determine what had happened that night. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department began processing the missing person report for Rebecca Sloan by establishing an on-scene investigative team right at University Medical Center, which was identified as the last recorded location where she was present. All surveillance camera footage within the hospital premises was collected, including the angles at the east entrance, the corridor leading out to the parking lot, the pole-mounted cameras at the edge of the parking area, the cameras on the roof of the emergency department, and the secondary cameras located within the staff-only grounds. For the routes Rebecca could have taken, the digital forensics team coordinated to obtain and process traffic camera video from the intersections around UMC, including Charleston Boulevard, University Center Drive, and the nearby intersections close to the parking structures. All footage was reviewed in chronological order to determine whether any vehicle matching the description of Rebecca's car left the area or whether any unusual human figures were seen moving between 1:47 a.m. and the moment her phone's GPS completely lost signal. While the video data was being analyzed, investigators on scene focused on interviewing people who were present in the area overnight. The team contacted security guards, late-shift medical staff, janitorial workers, drivers entering and exiting the hospital grounds, and individuals using the parking lot in the middle of the night. Several residents living in the apartments along Shadow Lane and in the small residential area behind the medical center were also approached to gather information, especially regarding unusual vehicle movement or odd sounds that occurred around or shortly after midnight. Despite a relatively large number of potential witnesses, no one reported seeing any commotion, loud shouting, or signs of a struggle. The complete absence of any attention-grabbing sounds in an area that normally has foot and vehicle traffic prompted the investigators to broaden their questioning to vehicles that had remained parked overnight, particularly those unregistered staff or visitor vehicles. At Rebecca's home in Spring Valley, the search focused on looking for any indication that she had returned home after her shift. There were no changes in the arrangement of items, no discarded clothing, no receipts, notes, or any action suggesting she had left the house with prior planning. The mailbox contained no relevant messages or documents. Her workplace schedule was re-examined to identify her last interactions. Colleagues on the same shift confirmed she finished work on time. There were no arguments, no professional incidents, and she did not appear distressed before leaving the emergency department. The shift log recorded no unusual situations that would have required her to leave the hospital after clocking out, meaning her movement toward the parking lot was entirely consistent with normal routine. Rebecca's phone was untraceable via location services from the very beginning, indicating the device was either powered off or abruptly lost power very close to the time she finished her shift. Carrier data showed no additional connection points after that moment, making reconstruction of her movements nearly impossible. When no leads emerged from electronic devices, the police expanded ground search operations. The K-9 team was deployed following the most likely walking path Rebecca would have taken out of the hospital area, including the outdoor corridors, employee parking lot, and rear service access routes. The working dogs were given scent opportunities around the parking lot and along the back exits of UMC where patches of open ground lie between administrative buildings. The K-9 operational area was later expanded to include nearby park grounds such as Rotary Park, vacant lots along Martin Luther King Boulevard, and the warehouse area behind the commercial buildings west of the hospital. In parallel with the K-9 unit, the Air Support Division's drone team conducted aerial sweeps of the area, focusing on large open spaces and poorly lit routes not covered by security cameras. The drones used infrared sensors to detect heat signatures or unusual movement within a several-mile radius of the hospital, including small desert patches interspersed within urban zones that are frequently overlooked in initial searches. Foot patrol teams checked locations that could serve as potential hiding spots or places a person might unintentionally end up: abandoned warehouses, storm drains, ramps leading to underground parking, and the rear areas behind the medical center, where delivery trucks operate at night. Each area was marked on the map to ensure no section was missed during the search. After more than 12 straight hours of continuous work, no tangible physical evidence emerged to suggest Rebecca's direction of travel or condition. The total lack of physical traces forced the police to continue expanding the geographic scope of the assessment without any specific anchor point, causing the first day's search to conclude in an atmosphere of uncertainty, but still without any concrete basis to determine exactly what happened in the hospital parking lot. 2 days after Rebecca Sloan was last recorded at the parking lot of University Medical Center, a call from a tourist at the Red Rock Canyon Overlook prompted search teams to immediately dispatch personnel to the area to verify information about a silver sedan abandoned at the edge of the parking area overlooking the desert valley. When Metro Police arrived, the vehicle was confirmed to be the one registered to Rebecca, parked neatly, as though the driver had deliberately maneuvered it into that spot and left the car voluntarily. All doors were locked with no signs of impact or forced entry, all glass surfaces intact, and no fresh scratches on the bodywork. Upon opening the doors to inspect the interior cabin, Investigators noted that the driver's seat was positioned exactly in line with Rebecca's height, the dashboard undisturbed, the steering wheel clean of any unusual marks. No evidence of struggle or violent movement, and no scattered items that drew attention. The trunk contained only basic personal tools, one neatly folded canvas bag, and a few small everyday items that held no evidentiary value. The fact that the car was found at a location roughly 30 minutes' drive from the hospital raised questions for investigators about how the vehicle had been brought there without leaving any positioning signals, especially since Rebecca's phone had been completely inactive since the night she disappeared. When examining the area around the car, police began to record the first items directly linked to Rebecca, scattered across the rocky and sandy desert ground near the parking spot. A UMC employee badge was found a few steps from the driver's door, face down in the sand and partially covered by wind-blown dust, apparently dropped unintentionally. Not far away, a women's athletic shoe matching the color and style Rebecca typically wore to work was discovered intact, with no tears, lying at an angle that seemed inconsistent with the owner willingly stepping out of the vehicle. Near the edge of the parking area, the search team found a roll of medical gauze commonly used in the emergency department, with the leading end unraveled and mixed with the characteristic dust and dirt of the Red Rock Canyon area. The presence of these items led police to note that they were the first details supporting any reconstruction of Rebecca's path of movement, although there was still insufficient basis to determine whether the objects had been dropped voluntarily or as the result of an adverse event. With the car located at a scenic overlook deep within the Rocky Valley area, search teams expanded their inspection to the western desert region, where the terrain shifted from man-made parking surfaces to jagged rock formations and wind-carved sand strips. K-9 units were deployed along the most likely pedestrian descent route into the valley, while drones were flown along the small trails extending into the conservation area where visitors typically stopped for photos or short walks. Foot patrol teams divided to sweep the area below the overlook, checking wind-sheltered rock ledges, large fissures, and depressions where a person could accidentally fall in low-light conditions. Hours of continuous searching yielded only empty reports, no fresh footprints, no scraps of fabric, no additional personal items, no signs of sinking or disturbance in the sand beyond what natural desert winds would cause. Popular hiking routes were also checked in case Rebecca had left the car and walked onto a trail, but no cameras captured her presence at any rest stops. The terrain team documented all swept areas to ensure no small paths between large rock formations were overlooked. After the expanded Red Rock Canyon area had been thoroughly searched by both professional teams and volunteers, no new data emerged to support any hypothesis about Rebecca's location. The car remained the only tangible lead but offered no information about her direction of travel after leaving the vehicle. The prolonged lack of data caused the investigation to stall, with every theory lacking physical grounding to confirm it. Over the 9 months following the car's discovery, police continued to receive sporadic tips from the public about unclear figures moving near desert areas or objects suspected to match, but all were either unverified or unrelated to Rebecca. Her phone remained inactive. Her bank accounts showed no transactions. There were no social media logins, and no activity indicated she was still within the Las Vegas area or nearby regions. With no new leads over an extended period, the case file on Rebecca Sloan's disappearance was classified as a cold case, officially marking it as a missing person investigation with no specific progress, despite search efforts spanning multiple different terrains. 2 years after the time Rebecca Sloan's sedan was found at Red Rock Canyon Overlook, an emergency report was sent to the Henderson Dispatch Center, when a couple driving through the old industrial area on the southern edge of the city spotted a woman in severe physical distress leaning against the metal wall of an abandoned warehouse. The area had long seen very little traffic, due to many warehouses having ceased operations years earlier, with cracked internal roads, faded signage, and empty storage yards. When the Henderson ambulance reached the location described by the reporting party, they found the victim in a near-exhausted state, her body so emaciated that the bone structure of her shoulders and legs was clearly visible, her clothing no longer intact. Many areas covered in the distinctive red dust of the Henderson Desert region, and her bare feet showing deep cracks from prolonged contact with the hot, dry ground. Preliminary identification based on height, build, and facial features led medical personnel to suspect that the woman might be Rebecca, the individual reported missing 2 years earlier. After coordinating additional police presence to secure the scene, the ambulance team transported the victim to Henderson Hospital for emergency treatment, prioritizing stabilization of body temperature, severe dehydration, and vital signs. While the victim was being moved on a stretcher into the emergency room, hospital staff noted several comparison-worthy features: uneven hair length with many sections crudely cut, unsteady gait, slow response to light, and difficulty maintaining balance when supported upright. These characteristics were photographed and immediately forwarded to the Metro Police Department's identification unit for comparison with photographs collected from Rebecca's file at the time of her disappearance. Once the images were analyzed, the Metro investigative team determined that the victim had a high likelihood of matching Rebecca based on anthropometric factors, such as jawline shape, nose wing structure, distance between the eyes, and overall body proportions. This prompted Metro to immediately dispatch a task force to Henderson Hospital to coordinate official biometric verification. At the same time, cold case investigators received internal notification that a woman matching the description had been located and began reactivating the long-dormant file that had been frozen due to lack of leads over an extended period. The reappearance of a previously missing person under unclear circumstances in one of the abandoned industrial zones heightened the need to re-examine all data related to these areas. The warehouse location where Rebecca was found had previously appeared in several civilian reports concerning suspicious nighttime activity involving small delivery vehicles, although no direct evidence of specific criminal acts had been documented. Records from UMC indicated discrepancies in the inventory counts of certain opioid pain medication lots during the period when Rebecca was still employed, leading investigators to consider the possibility that her reappearance might be connected to a complex chain of events that occurred prior to her disappearance. Some senior staff had previously received internal reports of irregularities in the pharmacy storage management system, including inventory figures that did not match declared quantities. Although there had been no prior basis to connect those irregularities to Rebecca's disappearance, her reappearance in an area considered high risk increased law enforcement attention to the hypothesis of illicit drug diversion activity involving medical personnel. As the official identity verification process was carried out, Metro investigators opened a new case file to document the entire sequence of events from the moment the public discovered the victim, including geographic location, environmental conditions, suspicious indicators around the warehouse area, and the victim's external characteristics at the time of intake. Rebecca's emergence in Henderson while her missing person file remained in cold case status created a requirement to expand the scope of lead comparison, since the location where she was found was far from the site of the abandoned vehicle documented in the original file, forming a new axis of movement that needed independent analysis. Investigative teams quickly gathered maps of the Henderson Industrial Zone, lists of owners of vacant warehouses, data on vehicles that had previously entered the area, and began compiling a list of individuals exhibiting suspicious activity around the access roads leading to the warehouse district. Every piece of information was added to support determination of whether Rebecca's appearance in a state of severe debilitation was the result of organized criminal conduct exploiting vulnerabilities in the pharmaceutical management system. As a result, Rebecca's reappearance became the catalyst that reactivated the entire case file with a new focus, including analysis of her professional connections at UMC in the period immediately preceding her disappearance. At the emergency department of the Henderson Hospital, the personal identification process was immediately implemented as soon as the woman found in the Henderson industrial area was brought into the examination room, with fingerprint samples prioritized for collection first to cross-reference with Metro's database. The prints were taken using a digital biometric scanner, producing full fingerprint models for both hands. When the scan data was uploaded to the system, the matching software displayed a very high degree of match with the fingerprint record belonging to Rebecca Sloan, which had been stored when her missing person report was filed 2 years earlier. To ensure the identification was not erroneous, the specialized team also conducted secondary characteristic checks, including a slightly reduced height due to physical debilitation, shoulder asymmetry, wrist proportions, and overall hand shape, all of which fell within the range consistent with medical data previously recorded at UMC. Facial image recognition was performed by comparing bone ratios, distances between anthropometric points, and primary facial contour structures. Although some features had been altered due to prolonged physical deterioration, there was still sufficient basis to confirm this was the same individual. Once identity verification was complete, the medical team proceeded with a comprehensive assessment of Rebecca's physical condition. Initial observations showed a drastic reduction in nutritional status compared to any prior record. Body mass had decreased by nearly half, skin was pallid and had lost natural elasticity, and there was clear muscle atrophy with significantly reduced muscle density in the arms, shoulders, back, and legs. Teeth displayed abnormal plaque buildup, indicating a lack of essential minerals. Examinations revealed multiple external signs consistent with prolonged emaciation, including peeling skin at the elbows, knees, and ankles. The body bore numerous injuries of varying severity, including large bruising patterns across the mid-rib area, small abrasions running along the arms, and mild swelling at the wrists and ankles with shapes similar to those caused by rounded or hard-surfaced objects, forming indented lines. Some bruises appeared in circular patterns indicating sustained pressure applied continuously to a fixed area of skin. The distribution of injuries suggested repeated mechanical impacts of different types over an extended period. Additionally, numerous small scars were present on the shoulders, upper arms, and lower abdomen with sharp, even edges, indicating prior penetration or cutting by a sharp object. On the scalp, several sections of hair had been unevenly cut, with abnormally short roots in certain spots, suggesting intervention with cutting tools under non-professional conditions. Alongside the injury profile, the layer of dust adhering to Rebecca's body was also documented. The lower legs and tops of the feet were covered with a reddish-brown dust layer, whose texture matched the desert soil of Henderson. The outer elbows showed tiny silver-colored metal particles, suspected to be shavings from a worn metal surface. These materials were collected and stored separately for analysis. During the examination of her torn clothing and remaining front pockets, the evidence team discovered a heavy industrial-grade steel key with a single-cut tooth pattern, shaped to fit large mechanical locks commonly used in warehouses or commercial storage facilities. The key's surface displayed small patches of oxidation along the teeth and shank, indicating repeated exposure to moisture or metal environments. This was the only mechanical tool-type item found on Rebecca's person, not listed among her personal belongings in the missing person file, so it was immediately sealed for preservation. While documenting injuries on the body, investigators described several marks that could potentially help identify the environment Rebecca had been in before being found. On the outer right forearm, there were thin parallel striations running from the wrist nearly to the elbow, a pattern commonly seen when skin contacts a textured or metal mesh surface. The heels showed deep cracks and tearing of the horny layer, typical of continuous movement over unprotected hot ground. The wrist areas had darkened, thickened skin compared to adjacent regions, possibly due to repeated friction against a hard object. Pressure points at both ends of the shoulder bones formed slight indentations, suggesting she had worn or carried weight from an item with straps or handles. All observed injury characteristics were photographed in high resolution and compiled into a detailed descriptive report to support comparison during evidence analysis. The inventory of evidence collected from Rebecca included the industrial key, desert dust samples from the skin, metal particles adhering to the elbows, unevenly cut hair samples, cracked horny layer from the feet, and high-resolution image data documenting all injuries. Each sample was separately sealed, assigned standardized codes, placed in preservation containers, and transferred to the forensic unit's storage system for classification. Henderson Hospital also created a comprehensive record of all body measurements taken upon admission to facilitate anthropometric comparison in further specialized analyses. The medical analysis was conducted in the specialized physical examination room at Henderson Hospital, where forensic physicians performed a detailed assessment of every vital indicator to evaluate Rebecca Sloan's physical condition based on the signs recorded during the initial examination. The forensic medical team remeasured all vital signs, body weight, skin thickness, muscle density, and the extent of surface injuries to determine the degree of nutritional deficiency. The body mass index showed severe, prolonged weight loss, along with muscle atrophy, far exceeding the levels seen in temporary starvation conditions. Soft tissue evaluation in the upper arms, abdomen, and legs revealed pronounced protein deficiency, particularly in the large muscle groups, manifested by loss of natural contour and sharply reduced elasticity. When the skin was pinched and lifted, it did not immediately return to its original state, reflecting prolonged dehydration combined with a lack of essential electrolytes. The forensic physicians noted multiple signs indicating the body had been subjected to long-term restricted movement. Along both wrists were dark, ring-shaped indentations of consistent width, suggesting the skin had repeatedly rubbed against a hard object or rope-like material with a repeating structure, resulting in callus formation on the surface. Similar indentations appeared around the ankles but were less uniform in shape, with sharper edges than those on the wrists, indicating the contacting material may have been different or exerted greater frictional force. Several areas of calloused skin on the heels and soles of the feet showed characteristics consistent with prolonged standing or walking on hard surfaces without protective footwear. At the elbows, small point-like calluses were present, aligned along the long axis of the arms, suggesting repeated leaning or pressure against rough surfaces. The forensic physicians recorded that many injuries on the body had healed in an abnormal structural manner, particularly the deep cracks on the shins and below the knees, where scar tissue formed not in straight bands but deviated to both sides. This indicated that during the healing process, the body lacked the necessary nutrients to properly restore tissue. On the right shoulder was a scar nearly 2 inches long with thick, raised, and roughened edges, evidence of a deeper injury than the others, and healing under conditions without medical care. In addition, there were small, dot-like scars scattered across the lower abdomen and both flanks. These scars had uniform diameters, slightly depressed surfaces, and suggested repeated impact from a sharp object. Examination of the left leg bones revealed evidence of an old, previously healed fracture that had united with misalignment, shown by a crooked union line at the bone ends, but without signs of surgical fixation. In the lower rib area, the forensic physician noted a previously healed unstable fracture with a still prominent ridged union surface. Examination of the fingernails and toenails showed signs of prolonged nutrient deficiency. Brittle, easily splitting nail plates, pale color, and vertical ridging. Some nails had minor chips, indicating repeated mechanical stress, but no signs of bruising or bleeding around the nail beds. Blood tests to measure vitamin and mineral levels revealed that Rebecca's vitamin D concentration was extremely low, falling into the lowest clinical evaluation category, indicating prolonged lack of natural sunlight exposure. Calcium and phosphorus levels were also significantly below normal, contributing to reduced bone density and increased fracture risk. Indicators related to micronutrient metabolism suggested deficiency in the B vitamin group, particularly B12, affecting the peripheral nervous system and manifesting as slowed muscle reflexes and unsteady gait. Magnified skin examination showed widespread, dry, flaking epidermis, thickened stratum corneum in some areas, but abnormally thin in others. Hair samples collected from various locations on the scalp displayed color changes in segments consistent with episodic, prolonged malnutrition. At the hair roots, the physicians discovered tiny dust particles deeply embedded in the hair shafts. Preliminary microscopic observation revealed the dust structure as fine rock powder ranging from gray to silver in color, likely originating from a worn metal surface. Several hair segments had been cut off unevenly, suggesting the use of non-specialized cutting tools. The forensic unit, together with the medical team, prepared an official report documenting the overall health condition, injuries, signs of movement restriction, and environmental factors affecting the body. The document recorded the following findings: severe prolonged malnutrition, ligature mark-like calluses on the skin, abnormally healed wounds, scars of varying ages, extremely low vitamin D levels, reduced mineral density, and foreign materials adhering to the skin and hair. The detailed cataloging of every injury and every biological indicator established a comprehensive baseline description of Rebecca's physical condition at the time of intake, including all visible data on the body that could assist in tracing the environmental origin where the victim had been held for an extended period. At the Clinical Psychology Assessment Unit within Henderson Hospital, psychologists were mobilized to conduct an examination of Rebecca Sloan in order to document her behavioral responses and determine the current level of psychological trauma according to diagnostic standards. The evaluation began with observation of basic reactions as Rebecca was brought into the examination room. She maintained a hunched posture, arms pulled tightly against her body, eyes constantly scanning the space as if searching for an escape route, and reacted strongly to any sound coming from the direction of the door. When a medical staff member accidentally placed a metal instrument on the table, the light clinking sound caused Rebecca to flinch sharply, immediately shifting sideways to the right and instinctively trying to maximize distance in a defensive maneuver. When asked to move to the respiratory assessment area in a narrow space enclosed by metal partitions, she immediately refused, backed up against the wall, her entire body rigid, breathing erratic, displaying a clear avoidance response that forced staff to relocate her to a larger room to continue the examination. During a preliminary orientation assessment, Rebecca avoided looking at large metal-structured objects, especially when they reflected light. These avoidance signs were noted by the specialists as reactions linked to prolonged negative experiences in a confined environment involving metal elements. During the question and answer process, when asked to confirm the name of the hospital where she had previously worked, Rebecca exhibited signs of panic. Breathing accelerated, hands gripped the edge of the bed tightly, and her head shook slightly in an unsteady rhythm. When a staff member inadvertently mentioned pain-relieving medications commonly used in emergency care, her reaction intensified, further eyes widened, heart rate increased noticeably, facial muscles tensed, and her mouth trembled slightly without producing words. These manifestations were recorded as avoidance responses tied to occupational or previously encountered environmental triggers. Throughout the assessment session, Rebecca rarely maintained eye contact for more than a few seconds and tended to look down at the floor or toward a corner of the wall, especially when hearing words related to the hospital setting. The psychologists attempted a sound reflex test by playing low-volume sounds through a speaker, but when a sound simulating the metallic clank of a door opening and closing was played, Rebecca immediately covered her ears, bent forward at the waist, and drew her legs in tightly. This response was documented as hypersensitivity related to sounds characteristic of enclosed spaces with mechanical locks. During cognitive function assessment, Rebecca struggled to answer questions requiring her to describe sequences of events or estimate time intervals. She tended to repeat short words when overstimulated, for example, when an examiner accidentally dropped an item onto the floor. Specialist notes indicated that Rebecca's attention span was significantly impaired. Information processing speed was slow, and she became easily disoriented with sudden noises. In emotion recognition tests, she showed no response to positive images but displayed muscle tension and held her breath when shown images depicting dark spaces or rooms with metal walls. The psychologists conducted checks for signs consistent with trauma bonding patterns by evaluating her responses to questions about individuals who may have controlled or exerted influence over her. Whenever asked whether anyone had supervised her daily activities for an extended period, Rebecca displayed confusion, clenched her hands together, kept her gaze lowered, leaned slightly backward as if trying to create an invisible distance, while her voice became nearly inaudible. When questions were rephrased indirectly to avoid emotional triggering, she exhibited behavior suggesting she was trying to protect someone, lightly shaking her head and biting her lip, not answering but without strong signs of objection. These behaviors were noted by specialists as patterns commonly seen in cases where victims develop dependency mechanisms toward a controlling figure under prolonged conditions of restricted freedom. During periods of free observation when Rebecca was not engaged in direct interaction, she frequently sat curled up in a corner of the room, hands resting on her knees, eyes fixed on a single point, and occasionally startled at the sound of people walking in the hallway. When staff moved the examination bed, The sound of metal wheels rolling across the floor immediately caused Rebecca to lurch to the opposite side of the bed and seek something to hold on to, reflecting heightened vigilance toward mechanical sounds. When asked to hold a pen to fill out information on a form, she gripped the pen excessively tightly, her hand shook uncontrollably, and her handwriting was faint and did not follow the lines. When a specialist attempted to adjust the room lighting by partially opening the curtains, Rebecca reacted by shielding her eyes with her hand, not because the light was too bright, but seemingly because the act of opening the curtains evoked a sense of loss of control in a confined environment. Sleep pattern observations showed that Rebecca had difficulty falling asleep and woke easily. During short-term monitoring, she exhibited mild twitching movements when closing her eyes, accompanied by intermittent rapid breathing, as if reacting to subconscious stimuli. Specialists measured heart rate when references were made to spaces with metal walls, or to the behavior of forcefully closing doors. Her heart rate rose rapidly, and then returned to baseline more slowly than normal. Behavioral data collection was recorded in the psychological file, along with descriptions of each reaction to specific types of stimuli. These documents, including the PTSD assessment scale, avoidance response severity classification table, cognitive indices, and notes on dependency patterns, were compiled and forwarded to the Special Investigation Unit handling the case to serve as a basis for analyzing the victim's behavioral responses in the context of prolonged exposure to a confinement environment. In the first interview session conducted in the medical interrogation room at Henderson Hospital, Rebecca Sloan was asked to describe what she remembered about the time of her disappearance, and her statement allowed authorities to establish an initial sequence of events. According to Rebecca's description, the incident took place in the employee parking lot at UMC, right next to the driver's side door of her sedan, immediately after she finished a phone call with her mother. She stated that as her right hand touched the door handle and she was about to step into the car, her attention was drawn to a slight movement a few steps away, causing her to turn her head to the right. The moment she turned, a hand from behind clamped tightly over her mouth, while a strong pulling force acted on her upper arm, making her lose balance and dragging her backward out of the lid area. Rebecca said her initial reflex was to resist by jerking her elbow and tilting her head, but the grip tightened further, preventing any sound, and at the same time a soft-surfaced object soaked with a chemical smell was pressed firmly over her nose and mouth. The sharp, pungent odor caused near-immediate dizziness. Her heart rate surged. Then her body grew heavy and powerless, her muscles no longer responding to her will. In the few seconds before losing consciousness, Rebecca recalled feeling herself being dragged down onto the ground, completely out of camera view, and then lifted by two arms belonging to an unidentified person. After that point, her awareness faded, leaving only the sound of a van door slamming shut and the smell of diesel fuel. When she first regained consciousness in a hazy state, she said she was in the back of a dark cargo compartment with no windows, a low metal ceiling, and a floor that vibrated with the vehicle's motion. Rebecca described the space as cramped, only large enough for her body to lie on its side, with metal hooks along both walls of the compartment that jingled faintly whenever the vehicle accelerated or decelerated. She reported hearing two men talking in the front cab. Their voices were muffled by the engine noise, but still clear enough for her to realize this was not a spontaneous act, but something planned in advance. Rebecca caught only a few disjointed words related to timing, avoiding main roads, and a phrase about the need to leave no trace, but she could not recall the exact wording due to the lingering effects of the sedative. Her statement described the incident as a deliberate, coercive act, intended to remove the victim from the hospital area, using a cargo transport vehicle to evade street camera systems. When asked about possible motives she could identify, Rebecca stated that she had previously had a conflict with an individual at the hospital regarding the management process for specially controlled medications. In her statement, Rebecca explained that she had been asked to sign several dispensing documents for opioid pain medications that did not match the actual quantities used during her shift, and she had refused to sign off on them. From that point onward, Rebecca said she repeatedly felt watched in the hospital corridors and had seen a pharmacy technician from the drug storage area appearing in places unrelated to that person's assigned duties. When asked to describe the individual more clearly, Rebecca said the man had once approached her closely in the medication dispensing area, asked about the time she finished her shift, and displayed an unfriendly attitude. She could not confirm whether this person was connected to the incident, but the description was recorded by the investigative team for cross-checking against shift schedules and pharmacy access logs. In addition to information about a possible work-related motive, Rebecca provided details about the vehicle's movements while she was being transported away from UMC. She said the van followed a route with many continuous turns, then made one brief stop accompanied by the sound of a metal door at the rear opening and closing, before continuing onto a road surface that became noticeably rougher. When the vehicle finally came to a complete stop, Rebecca heard the door open and was pulled out while extremely weak. Her eyes could only open partially, but she sensed a damp smell and the distinctive echo of an enclosed space. She remembered feeling her body placed onto a cold surface, hearing the sound of a mechanical lock, and then the sound of footsteps moving away from the location. The investigative team constructed a timeline based on this statement by cross-referencing the moment UMC cameras lost sight of Rebecca with a realistic time frame for a van to exit the hospital area without being identified. Investigators reviewed lists of small cargo vehicles that had moved near the parking lot during the window when she lost contact, using traffic camera data. The timeline was built to determine the minimum duration required for a vehicle to travel from UMC to the unknown location. Rebecca, described as a dark cargo hold with a vibrating floor and metal hooks clinking. Incorporating her statement into the timeline helped verify the consistency between camera data and Rebecca's description of the period during which she lost consciousness, creating a comparison chart of travel duration and possible turning directions during the unmonitored time frame. In the next working session, Rebecca Sloan was asked to describe in detail the conditions of confinement that she remembered during the period she was out of contact. She said the first place she woke up after being sedated was a completely dark room, with only very faint light coming from a metal door slit above, just enough to make out the basic shape of the space. Rebecca described the characteristic sound of a generator running continuously, a steady, low hum and slight vibration spreading through the metal floor. When she placed her hand on the surface, she felt the coldness and cyclical vibration that made it hard to distinguish time of day. The floor had raised ridges running lengthwise, characteristic of container floors or cargo holds. The room's metal walls had a rough surface. When she leaned against them, it felt abrasive and cold. Rebecca did not see any windows or external light sources beyond the small slit above the door, making it impossible to determine time, wind direction, or the relative position of the room. She said the space was large enough for her to sit and lie down, but not enough to stretch her arms fully out to the sides. Whenever someone entered, the sound of a mechanical lock was very clear, followed by a strong flashlight beam directed straight into her face, making it difficult to see the features of the person approaching. Rebecca described being forced to perform tasks related to medications, specifically sorting blister packs, separating bags by code, and marking each package with a marker pen. She described a small table fixed to the wall, with long scratch marks from friction, where the blister packs were stacked on top of each other. Rebecca said that when she did not work at the correct speed or wrote the wrong symbol, the man supervising would tap a metal object on the table to create a loud noise, then grip her shoulder tightly to force her to continue working. Rebecca stated that the medications she sorted included groups of tablet painkillers, some small vials of injectable solution, and bags of medication with color codes that she did not recognize as part of the UMC system. She was instructed to sort only by shape and color, without reading the drug names. Rebecca described that during the times she was brought into the forced workroom, she had to wear a pair of light blue rubber gloves that were the wrong size, making manipulation difficult and creating a hot friction sensation at her fingertips. When the gloves tore, the supervisor would immediately throw another pair onto the table without any explanation. With no natural light visible, Rebecca could not determine time markers. She only knew that the generator changed sound intensity at certain points, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter, which helped her sense that many hours might have passed. When asked about her daily routine, Rebecca described that every time she was taken out of the dark room, her eyes hurt from the ceiling-mounted lights in the corridor. The corridor was narrow, the hollow metal floor echoed with every step, and there was only one direction leading to the area she called the medication sorting room. She said drinking water was provided in reused plastic bottles, very small amounts with an old plastic smell. Food was dry, usually nutrition bars or soft rolls, sometimes crumbled, with no distinct smell. When answering about control methods, Rebecca described that the supervisor always stood close behind her, watching every movement. If she slowed down or turned her head for too long, the person would pull her wrist down onto the table or lightly squeeze her upper arm as a warning. In some cases, when she could not complete the task due to exhaustion, the supervisor would place a metal object on the floor and drag it back and forth, creating a sharp, prolonged sound that caused her to panic. Rebecca described this as a frequent punishment method, because when asked about the space around the room, Rebecca said she could not determine her location or direction of transport because every time she was moved, her eyes were covered with a dark, damp-smelling cloth, and her ears only heard footsteps, mechanical lock sounds, and sometimes the sound of heavy objects being dragged across the metal floor. She described one rare moment when the cloth shifted slightly, and she saw oval-shaped ventilation holes under the floor, similar to hydraulically cut holes on old cargo containers. Rebecca also described that when she touched the corner of the room, she felt poorly finished welds, a rough surface with excess metal residue, indicating the room was not designed for habitation, but had been converted from a storage compartment. When asked about distinctive smells, Rebecca described the room as having the smell of generator oil, hot metal, and occasionally, a faint antiseptic smell mixed with the scent of shredded paper from cardboard boxes. These descriptions helped form an image of the confinement environment, but she emphasized that she could not identify a specific location. She recalled one time hearing a large truck pull up near where she was held, the sound of air brakes and the cargo door opening downward, suggesting she might have been near an industrial transport area or warehouse. In the final documentation, the specialist team compiled all statements regarding sounds, floor surfaces, wall materials, vibration, smells, and spatial structure to create a catalog of physical elements, matching Rebecca's description, serving as a basis for comparison with storage facilities and metal structures in potentially related areas. Rebecca Sloan was asked to describe the sequence of her escape that she still remembered, starting from the moment she first noticed the initial lapse in her captor's supervision. According to her statement, the opportunity arose during an unspecified period of time when the man responsible for controlling her left the forced workroom for longer than usual. Previously, every time this person exited the room, the mechanical lock sound from the outside was activated immediately. But on the day Rebecca described, the lock did not engage after he stepped out. She said she did not know the reason, only recalling that at that moment the generator's steady hum continued without interruption, and there were no returning footsteps. When she stood up to check the area near the door slit, Rebecca noticed a slightly bent metal hook in the right corner of the wall near the floor, which appeared to have been pulled hard multiple times before. She used both hands to pull on this hook, with the intention of creating a leverage point to inspect the door slit. While pulling, she discovered a gap under the door wide enough to slip her hand through. As she felt along the edge of the door to locate the locking mechanism, her fingers touched a small metal object lying right against the base of the wall. When she picked it up, she realized it was a large iron key, industrial style. Rebecca did not know which door the key was for, but she described it as having rough-cut teeth and a worn handle. She decided to try it on the main door's lock. After turning the key in various directions multiple times, the lock made a faint click, and the door showed signs of movement. Rebecca described her physical condition at that moment as extremely weak, but she still had enough strength to push the door open a few inches. When the gap was wide enough, she crawled out into the corridor. The corridor, as she described it, was long and narrow, with high-hanging fluorescent lights, some of them flickering, and a hollow metal floor. She moved along the wall, keeping her breathing shallow so she could listen for sounds. When she reached the first corner, she heard the familiar sound of metal wheels rolling on the floor coming from a distance and immediately pressed herself into a wall recess. Once the sound faded, she continued in the direction she believed led to an exit. Rebecca described 3 metal doors in the corridor. 2 were secured with large mechanical locks, while the remaining door was ajar about an inch. She tried inserting the key she had found into the lock of the ajar door, and it fit. When she turned the key, the door opened fully and led into a larger space with echoes and the smell of industrial dust. Inside, she described an abandoned material storage or warehouse area with rows of closely spaced metal shelves, many old cardboard boxes, and light filtering through small gaps in the corrugated metal roof. Rebecca saw no one in this area, so she tried to move along the shelves to find a way out. She heard strong wind coming from the left side, indicating an opening to the outside. She described the feeling of her feet stepping onto concrete for the first time after a long period on metal flooring. As she approached the area where the wind was blowing strongly, she noticed a roll-up door that was lifted about 2 feet, possibly due to malfunction or being stuck. Rebecca lay flat on the ground and crawled out underneath. Outside, she described the ground covered in a fine red dust, typical of the industrial area, and the space opened up more but was still enclosed by surrounding metal buildings. While observing, Rebecca heard a loud sound from a distance similar to a train moving along tracks. The sound repeated in a steady cycle, helping her determine the approximate direction of the railroad line. She decided to move toward the sound because she believed it might be an area near a transportation route leading to a main road. Rebecca described the difficulty of walking due to her weakened body, but she tried to maintain small steps, staying close to walls to avoid being exposed in open areas. She said she saw tall steel poles and overhead power lines, suggesting a location near transportation infrastructure. She followed along the warehouse walls for an unspecified long period, only knowing that every time she heard a loud noise, she stopped and crouched close to the ground to reduce the risk of being detected. As she got closer to the train sound, she saw a railroad track running parallel to the row of industrial buildings. Rebecca did not step onto the tracks but walked along the outer edge of the dirt shoulder, avoiding making noise. She described the journey lasting many hours in darkness, with the only light coming from scattered pole lamps and distant passing truck headlights. Rebecca said that after leaving the initial warehouse area, she encountered no one, but she continuously heard irregular vehicle movement, forcing her to hide in the shadows of old containers or behind stacks of pallets to avoid being seen. When describing her physical condition, she said she nearly collapsed from exhaustion multiple times, but forced herself to keep moving in short segments, out of fear of returning in the direction she had come from. She described an area with many rusted metal drums lined up in rows, bearing faded chemical hazard symbols on their surfaces. The wind blowing through created a low humming sound. She passed through that area and saw an old sign ahead that read, Henderson Industrial Zone, although the lettering was faded and incomplete. As she reached the edge of the industrial zone, Rebecca leaned against the metal wall of an abandoned warehouse because she no longer had the strength to continue. This was also the moment she was discovered by members of the public who called emergency services. All details provided by Rebecca were fully recorded so that authorities could compile a list of environmental features matching her description and determine the sequence of movement throughout her escape from the place of confinement. The industrial key seized from Rebecca Sloan's front pocket was transferred to the Metro Forensic Evidence Examination Room for analysis to determine its origin, the compatible lock type, and its range of use within the industrial facility system in Henderson. The key sample was a heavy carbon steel mechanical key, with a thicker shank than residential keys, coarse-cut teeth, and even wear visible on both edges of the key body, indicating repeated use in a high-hardness steel lock. The forensic team used laser projection to measure the tooth profile, identifying the cut pattern as belonging to the industrial roll-pin core lock group, a type commonly fitted on warehouse roll-up doors, fixed container entry points, or equipment storage doors in industrial zones. Measurements of tooth depth and cut angles showed the key was manufactured to the standard of 2 major companies that supply mechanical locks for Nevada's warehousing and logistics systems, helping to narrow the comparison scope. When examining the key bow in detail, forensics noted a small indentation near the very end of the bow, not caused by impact, but by repeated friction inside a lock with cylindrical pin tumblers. This mark helped rule out many types of locks used for residential homes or small facilities, as they lack a comparable pressure pin design. Preliminary analysis results were forwarded to the Infrastructure Investigation Team, where Henderson's industrial lock lookup tool was activated to cross-reference the key pattern against lists of warehouses, storage buildings, container yards, and registered metal storage facilities in the city system. The specialized team created a 3D model of the key for comparison with locks commonly used in the Henderson industrial zone. During cross-checking, forensics eliminated newer generation locks because the cuts on the key were of an older style, incompatible with security upgrades implemented from 2017 onward. This narrowed the list to locations still using older lock types, mainly found in decommissioned warehouses, transferred transport facilities, or storage lots not yet retrofitted to newer standards. The initial list contained 184 facilities. After filtering by lock type and cylinder size, only 57 locations remained as possible matches for compatible lock types. The investigation team further eliminated facilities that had been inspected in recent years or no longer had generator activity, since Rebecca's statement identified the continuous generator sound as a distinctive environmental feature. This removed an additional 31 locations. The remaining sites were evaluated based on floor structure, because the testimony described a metal floor with raised ribs, characteristic of fixed containers or mobile warehouses lined with non-slip ribbed steel. After applying this criterion, only 14 locations still retained storage compartments or fixed containers. The forensic team analyzed the dust adhering to the key to determine whether the metal material matched any specific location. Spectrometric analysis revealed the presence of oxidized iron compounds mixed with pale reddish silica mineral dust, characteristic of the group of warehouses in the northern Henderson cluster near former industrial dirt quarries. This reduced the list to 6 locations. Investigators then reviewed electricity and fuel usage records for these facilities, looking for sites with unstable or long-duration generator operation that matched Rebecca's description of a steady, continuous vibration sound. 3 facilities showed unusually high diesel fuel consumption over the past 2 years and were placed in the priority group. Investigators collected additional vehicle registration data for vehicles that had entered and exited these facilities to cross-reference with the truck sounds Rebecca had described. 2 of the 3 locations had a history of receiving long metal box trucks, consistent with the compartment structure Rebecca described. Finally, the investigating agency used GIS data to cross-reference with the train track sound Rebecca reported hearing during her escape, and found that only 1 facility fell within the appropriate radius for train noise to reach at the intensity she described. This site is located in the eastern Henderson warehouse cluster, approximately 1/4 mile from the main rail line, close enough to produce the repeated, steady sound mentioned in her statement. Through this narrowing process, the list of matching locations was reduced to a single facility, whose metal structure aligned with the testimony, whose locking system was compatible with the key, which showed evidence of continuous generator operation, and which lay within the range of rail line sound that Rebecca described. Based on the forensic results from the key and the environmental condition filters, the investigation team developed a plan for an on-site inspection of this facility, preparing to survey the warehouse structure, locks, roll-up door systems, and metal flooring to determine the degree of match with Rebecca's statements and the physical evidence collected. After narrowing down the list of suspicious locations based on the key analysis and the physical elements Rebecca Sloan described, the Metro Special Investigative Team deployed on-site inspections at the remaining warehouse within the matching range. The facility is located on the eastern edge of the Henderson Industrial Zone, a rectangular metal warehouse structure with a corrugated metal roof featuring small gaps surrounded by old container yards. When the forensic team approached, the reddish-brown dust layer on the ground just outside matched the color of the dust samples collected from Rebecca's skin and feet. The silicon mineral concentration in the dust near the warehouse was quickly measured with a handheld device and showed close similarity to the dust sample taken from the victim's hair. The warehouse's roll-up door had an industrial roll-pin core lock, matching the type identified from the key analysis. The degree of wear on the lock, including longitudinal scratches along the edge and slight wear on the pin tumblers, reflected long-term repeated use. Upon opening the warehouse door, the investigative team noted ribbed metal flooring running the full length of the storage bay, thick steel construction, with anti-slip ridges that matched Rebecca's description of the vibrating sensation and raised ribs on the floor. The weld lines between the floor panels and side walls had slight raised beads that were not smoothly ground down, consistent with Rebecca's description of the metal surface feeling rough every time she touched it. Moving deeper inside, the inspection team discovered a small room partitioned off by metal walls added later, evident from the color mismatch and misaligned screw lines. Upon entering this room, the near-total darkness aligned with Rebecca's description of the room where she woke up after being sedated. The small room had a ventilation slit placed high near the ceiling, allowing only weak light to enter in a narrow streak, corresponding to the victim's description of the single light slit she had seen. The floor of the room exhibited a slight vibration when the warehouse's generator was started by the technical team for testing. The vibration propagated through the metal floor and walls in a low-frequency rhythm, matching the continuous sound characteristic Rebecca said she heard throughout her captivity. Positioned close to the left corner of the room, the investigative team found a slightly bent metal hook near the floor, exactly matching the location Rebecca described as the leverage point where she later found the key. Close examination showed long sliding marks and thin metal along the upper edge of the bend, indicating repeated downward force application. This was noted in the report, but no conclusion was drawn at the time. In the larger warehouse area, the team located a table fixed to the wall with steel screws. The table's surface bore long scratch marks consistent with Rebecca's description of the place where she was forced to sort medications. Faint black marker streaks remained on the table surface, matching the type of marking pen Rebecca mentioned using. Next to the table, the inspection team found torn fragments of light blue rubber gloves. Some pieces adhered with red silicone dust and hardened from heat exposure in the compartment. The glove size was larger than the victim's hand size, as Rebecca had previously stated. In the corner of the forced workroom, the investigative team collected 3 empty medication box shells with color codes similar to the type Rebecca described when she was made to sort them. Although the boxes no longer contained medication, traces of colored ink and thin paper fibers remained along the edges and were sealed for analysis. The pathway leading from the dark room to the work area was a narrow corridor with hollow metal flooring that produced a distinctive echo when stepped on, matching Rebecca's statement. The long corridor section had old fluorescent lights, 2 of which flickered in the exact positions Rebecca had described. The investigative team examined the exterior area of the warehouse to locate the point where Rebecca said she crawled out, and found the rear roll-up door stuck at a height equivalent to what she described. The lower edge of the roll-up door showed metal sliding marks and displaced dust streaks as though someone had crawled underneath. Dust samples were collected for comparison. Approximately 40 meters east of the roll-up door, the team located a freight railroad line. The distance matched the sound intensity Rebecca described when hearing trains during her escape. The air brake hissing and vibration from the tracks during a test train pass in the survey period produced sounds compatible with the level Rebecca noted in her statement. The inspection team continued examining the generator located at the rear of the warehouse. The unit was an industrial diesel type, with rust marks on the casing and a dust layer matching the composition found in Rebecca's hair. When run for testing, the generator produced a steady, low-frequency vibration and consistent motor cycling sound, exactly as Rebecca described. In the material storage area, forensic personnel noted fine silver dust particles on the metal shelves, and preliminary analysis showed the presence of abraded metal compounds similar to the dust sample found on the victim's elbows. Additionally, on the storage bay floor were several long drag marks from a heavy object, forming 2 faint parallel lines that could correspond to the sound Rebecca described when her supervisor moved items used for intimidation. Direct comparison of the environmental details with the medical file information and descriptions of injuries revealed multiple matches. The metal flooring capable of causing horizontal scratches, steel ridges causing indentations, sharp weld lines in room corners, generator vibration leading to muscle strain, fine metal dust adhering to hair and skin. The warehouse layout, physical structure, sounds, material types, distance to the railroad, lock style, floor type, and small room arrangement were all documented as consistent with Rebecca's sequence of descriptions and with the traces recovered from her body at the time of intake. When the facility in the Henderson Industrial Zone was determined to match many elements of the description, the on-site examination team proceeded to seal off the entire warehouse area, including the interior space and the adjacent container yard, to carry out evidence collection according to standard procedure. In the small room where Rebecca Sloan had been held, the examination team noted a metal chair with a fully welded frame, its legs bolted directly to the floor with large diameter bolts. The chair had 2 additional welded armrest bars, each fitted with a steel ring loop at the point near the elbow, sized sufficiently to accommodate zip ties or binding cords. On the surface of the steel rings, there remained layers of abrasion wear and brownish stains. Samples were collected to determine whether they contained skin cells or fiber material. The seat surface displayed multiple parallel horizontal scratch lines of varying lengths, consistent with scratching caused by sharp objects or intense friction. The right corner of the chair showed a small indentation created by compressive force applied to the metal surface. Within the floor area surrounding the chair, the examination team found 3 segments of black nylon zip ties, 2 cut, 1 stretched with a whitened tension mark in the middle. The grooves on the tie indicated it had been tightened with enough force to leave impressions on human skin. A thin gray paracord fragment was discovered lodged under a floor rib channel, its fibers showing signs of having been pulled hard enough to fray. On the metal wall adjacent to the chair, the inspection team identified a fixed U-shaped hook anchor secured with 2 industrial steel screws. The hook's surface exhibited horizontal wear along its length, indicating repeated friction from a tied object. Contact areas on the wall surrounding the anchor point showed faint scratches extending upward approximately 1 meter, suggesting continuous impact from an object or human body. When examining the area, Rebecca described as the place where she was forced to sort medications, the examination team located a metal table fixed to the partition wall. Under the tabletop were 2 metal support frames, one of which had a zip tie segment caught between the frame and the wall panel. On the table surface, numerous faint black ink marks were scattered, determined to have the same shade as ink streaks found on empty boxes in the area. Empty cardboard boxes in the corner of the room were open for inspection. Inside were 2 shattered foam padding pieces coated with reddish-brown dust. Some foam fragments had indentations matching the width of tablet blister pack pills. The inspection team found numerous small white granules on the floor around the work table, suspected to be fragments from medical materials or packaging. These granules were sealed. During the sweep near the corridor entrance, the examination team discovered a small glass vial with a broken base. The label had been scratched off, but rectangular adhesive residue remained. A scrap of paper still adhering to the vial surface carried faint green ink marks, visible under various items throughout the warehouse. When examined under UV light, the forensic team observed a faint glowing streak on the inner surface of the vial, suspected to be residue from a medical solution previously contained inside. From the door of the small room leading into the corridor, the examination team found a segment of light blue rubber glove wedged in a floor gap, sized larger than an average female hand. The glove showed elongated stretching marks at the fingers, consistent with being tightened or torn during forced manipulation. In the central warehouse area, the investigation team recovered a small black nylon medical bag. The bag no longer had a functioning zipper. Inside were 3 pieces of gauze, 1 plastic syringe without a needle, and a pharmaceutical label bearing a serial code from the UMC medication management system. The label was creased at the corner, the print faded, but the batch production code still legible. When the nylon bag was examined under UV light, numerous small circular fluorescent marks were found scattered across its inner surface. In the storage compartment along the north wall, the examination team located a large plastic bin coated evenly with fine dust. On the bin's surface were 2 faint handprints, visible only under angled light. These contact marks were not clear enough for identification but matched the height Rebecca described when she had to brace herself against the bin to maintain balance. Near the jammed roll-up door area, the forensic team noted a long parallel streak where dust had been swept aside. Along this streak, a long brown hair was found. The hair was not lying naturally but caught in a floor seam. The sample was collected and sealed. In the dark corner behind the generator, the examination team discovered a broken object consisting of black plastic and a thin metal core, identified as the remaining portion of an industrial wire-cutting pliers handle. The plastic surface had a faint, oily streak, and the metal core had a small black nylon cord fragment attached, matching the color of the zip ties recovered earlier. At the base of the generator, the forensic team collected a piece of black fabric partially scorched. The fabric surface carried metal dust, and rapid analysis showed the presence of compounds similar to the dust found on Rebecca's elbows. In the dark corner of the room where Rebecca had described the position she maintained while movement was restricted, the investigation team found two crescent-shaped indentations on the metal floor surface. The size of the indentations matched the structure of the fixed chair in the center of the room, but the position of the two indentations was offset to the right, indicating prolonged heavy pressure applied there. A floor sample was cut out and sent for wear analysis. The investigation team constructed a three-dimensional crime scene map using LiDAR cameras, recording every evidence location, light direction, door position, wall beam height, and distances between areas. The map included 2 layers of data: physical structure and evidence placement. Once the map was completed, the team built a movement path model within the warehouse based on the victim's injury locations and evidence positions, aiming to reconstruct the forced activities, holding positions, access routes to the medication sorting table, body restraint anchor points, and the escape path Rebecca described. All data was sealed, backed up, and transferred into the case evidence file. During the examination of the evidence collected at the warehouse in the Henderson Industrial Zone, Metro's DNA testing unit identified a series of biological samples that did not match Rebecca Sloan. These were recovered from multiple different surfaces, including the inner side of zip ties, a light deposit on the fixed chair armrest, the edge of the medication sorting table, and a piece of black fabric located near the base of the generator. When these DNA samples were entered into the Nevada State Missing Persons Database, the system returned a high match probability with the biometric profile of Michelle Ortega, a 32-year-old woman who went missing 3 years earlier in Las Vegas under unclear circumstances. The matching information prompted the investigative team to immediately classify the evidence items containing these DNA samples as high priority, since many of the DNA traces appeared in interior areas of the warehouse that precisely matched the locations Rebecca described as places where she was forced to work or was restrained. Michelle's DNA was not only present on the surface of the medication sorting table, but also adhered in the metal grooves beneath the floor in the area where the examination team had documented 2 small, parallel, semicircular indentations. Under angled lighting, the inspection team discovered additional short black hair strands caught in the floor seams. These strands were analyzed and returned a complete DNA match with Michelle Ortega. When examining the restraint chair area, forensic personnel recovered an epithelial cell embedded in the worn metal of the wrist-securing steel ring. This sample also matched Michelle's DNA. The distribution of the DNA across surfaces was mapped into a diagram, showing that Michelle had likely been present at multiple locations within the warehouse, including the small isolation room, the sorting table area, and the fixed chair zone. Investigators noted a small gray plastic fragment found under the table frame, its structure consistent with a broken eyeglass temple. When compared against Michelle's personal belongings documented at the time of her missing person report, her family confirmed that Michelle wore gray-framed glasses. The plastic piece was submitted for further compositional analysis to determine compatibility with Michelle's eyeglass frame. Near the rear roll-up door area, the examination team found a dark brown streak on the metal edge that was identified as oxidized blood. When sampled and analyzed, the DNA inside matched Michelle's profile. This data led investigators to note the possibility that Michelle had been injured at that location. In the corner containing plastic barrels along the north wall, forensic personnel discovered a patch of dark blue synthetic fabric fibers, consistent with the material of a lightweight work jacket. When compared to the final clothing description in Michelle's missing person report, her family confirmed she had been wearing a dark blue jacket. The fabric fragment was sealed as related evidence. In the small room with ribbed metal flooring, the examination team used UV light and recorded several tiny fluorescent streaks that had not appeared in any samples related to Rebecca. but matched the fluorescence pattern previously observed in cases of blood that had been cleaned multiple times. Samples taken from these streaks returned DNA belonging to Michelle. The investigative team marked the area with LiDAR equipment to record the surface geometry in a 3D model, ensuring precise documentation of evidence locations. On the metal wall of the dark room, the examination team found faint vertical scratch marks, small and shallow, consistent with short fingernails. When samples were collected from the scratches, the testing group detected mixed DNA profiles, but one of the two sequences belonged to Michelle. Along the edge of the sorting table, UV inspection revealed a long, thin streak indicating the previous presence of a liquid. The area had been mostly wiped clean but still retained faint residue. Testing of the sample matched female DNA, and cross-reference confirmed it as Michelle. This suggested that during forced operations, Michelle may have been injured or made biological contact with the work surface. Near the corridor section, where Rebecca described hearing the sound of metal objects being dragged, the examination team discovered a small, dented aluminum cylindrical object coated with mixed dust. The interior of the cylinder contained low-level skin cell traces, and analysis matched Michelle's DNA. The object was added to the list of items that may have come into contact with the victim. Approximately 1 meter from the restraint chair location, under a thick layer of dust, the investigative team found a rolled piece of adhesive tape with the sticky side facing outward. Analysis of the adhesive composition and collected cellular material showed Michelle's DNA present on the tape. This mark was added to the evidence distribution diagram for consideration of restraint behavior involving tape. When expanding the inspection to the rear warehouse area, the examination team discovered a small strip of white cotton fabric caught in the gap of a rusted container. DNA results confirmed it belonged to Michelle and was unrelated to Rebecca. This raised the possibility that Michelle had attempted to find an escape route or had been moved through the rear area. In addition, forensic personnel found a crushed plastic water bottle containing a small amount of epithelial cells matching Michelle. The bottle's location indicated it was not in Rebecca's work area but near the access path to the container yard. The investigative team flagged this as evidence of Michelle's presence in an auxiliary area outside the dark room and sorting table zone. When compiling all DNA-related evidence, the 3D crime scene map showed Michelle's presence distributed across multiple locations in the warehouse, including the narrow confinement area, the forced labor zone, and the rear exit adjacent area. This distribution aligned with the injury characteristics described in Michelle's missing person file, including indications of captivity and physical trauma. In the space near the generator, forensic personnel identified a very faint dried blood smear on the backside of a metal shield plate. The DNA sample recovered also matched Michelle. Investigators noted that the blood smear's position was beyond the reach of someone standing upright, indicating Michelle's body had been lower than floor level at the time of contact. This data was incorporated into the crime scene map to reconstruct spatial sequence behavior. After aggregating the number of matching DNA samples, their dispersal, positions of appearance, and forms of evidence, the investigating agency added Michelle Ortega to the list of potential victims who had been held at this warehouse. The quantity of biological evidence and physical traces collected was sufficient to expand the investigation to include unresolved missing persons cases in Nevada, particularly those showing signs of coercion or loss of contact in the Las Vegas-Henderson area during the time frame overlapping Michelle's and Rebecca's disappearances, in order to determine whether other undetected victims may exist. After seizing the medication box, shells, label fragments, and medical items from the warehouse in Henderson, Metro's Pharmaceutical Investigation Unit proceeded to cross-reference the batch codes with University Medical Center's drug inventory system. The faint serial code printed on the label fragment, recovered from the sorting table area, was reconstructed using digital image processing technology, yielding a character string that matched a group of opioid painkiller medications listed under UMC's Special Controlled Substances category. When the inventory team retrieved stock data, the system recorded that this batch had been issued from the pharmacy warehouse 2 years earlier, coinciding exactly with the period when Rebecca Sloan was working night shifts in the emergency department. When cross-checking the daily dispensing logs, investigators discovered a discrepancy in quantity. The system showed a reduction of 2 boxes, while internal distribution records only confirmed the use of 1 box. This discrepancy had previously been flagged for internal review, but no cause was identified. When further batches sharing the same serial code were reviewed, 3 additional lots from the period when Rebecca was still employed also showed minor shortages, with discrepancies ranging from 1 to 3 boxes, each time small enough to be concealed as administrative errors, but cumulative enough to form a noticeable pattern. Initially, this led to Rebecca being considered a potential person of interest, as records placed her on duty during the times of the discrepancies. However, when authorities analyzed her statements about being required to sign off on incorrect quantities, combined with psychological data showing signs of prolonged coercion, this suspicion was gradually ruled out. Investigators then accessed personnel records to identify individuals with direct access to the UMC pharmacy warehouse and the ability to dispense medications using employee codes. The list contained only 4 names, among whom pharmacist Mark Vellon had shift schedules that nearly perfectly aligned with the periods when the medication lots were abnormally adjusted. Examination of the pharmacy warehouse access logs showed Vellon's employee code appearing consistently during multiple night shifts, including shifts that did not require the presence of an inventory pharmacist. Looking at the overlapping timeframes, investigators noted that on nights when Rebecca was working emergency shifts, Vellon was frequently present in the pharmacy warehouse more than usual and stayed longer than the duration of a single inventory check. When card swipe data was collected, investigators recorded that Mark Vellon was present in the pharmacy area on 3 consecutive nights immediately before Rebecca disappeared. Internal records showed that Vellon had once been verbally reminded about inconsistencies in medication storage procedures, but no formal discipline was issued. To establish any connection between Vellon and the Henderson warehouse, the financial investigation team examined bank card statements, phone location data, and unusual payments. GPS data from Vellon's phone over the previous year showed multiple appearances in the Henderson industrial area during late-night hours. These visits did not correspond to official work assignments and did not align with his typical commuting routes. Additionally, investigators found 3 fuel transactions for diesel paid with Vellon's card at a filling station near Henderson, even though he did not own any diesel-powered vehicle. When expanding the check into property records, no real estate was registered under Vellon's name. But in the Henderson Industrial Zone warehouse lease registry, a signature appeared that matched the signature sample in his personnel file. The lease contract was signed under the name of a shell company with no clear business activity. The digital documents unit rescanned the signature sample and confirmed that the characteristic strokes matched 84% with Mark Vellon's signature according to handwriting analysis. The key type specified in the warehouse lease contract matched the type of industrial key recovered from Rebecca, as the contract listed an older lock type requiring a roll-pin core key. Investigators reviewed traffic camera systems around the warehouse during the months Rebecca was missing. On multiple occasions, the system captured images of a small metal box truck approaching the suspected warehouse area, and this vehicle matched one that had appeared on the UMC parking lot cameras during nights when medication discrepancies occurred. The truck was registered to a small transport business, but the business owner stated that Vellon had rented the vehicle multiple times under short-term agreements. During the UMC pharmacy inventory audit, investigators analyzed medication, dispensing logs, and determined that every shorted batch had been confirmed either under Vellon's employee code or during timeframes when Vellon was present in the pharmacy warehouse. Rebecca had never signed any of the suspect dispensing slips. Electronic records only showed her name as recipient, while the digital signature authentication feature was not activated. This led investigators to suspect that data may have been deliberately entered incorrectly to create an appearance of legitimacy. When authorities compared Rebecca's statements about being forced to sign incorrect documents, her psychological profile regarding reactions to metal sounds in confinement environments, and the presence of UMC-coded medication batches in the Henderson warehouse, the investigative assessment concluded that the possibility of Rebecca voluntarily concealing medications was inconsistent with the physical evidence and the victim's physical condition upon discovery. To further confirm the link between Vellon and the Henderson warehouse, the investigation team examined the warehouse's electrical system and found that generator fuel bills were issued to an intermediary company, but that company had previously made salary transfers to Velen, labeled as temporary services. Metal dust samples collected from the warehouse showed abrasive compounds matching the dust found on Velen's work jacket in UMC security camera footage. Investigators compiled all of these connections into a comparison table to continue analyzing the supply chain of diverted medications and any personnel potentially involved in transporting and storing the drugs at the Henderson facility. While analyzing the evidence collected from the Henderson warehouse, Metro's DNA forensics unit detected a series of male-origin biological samples present on multiple different surfaces, including the fixed chair armrest, the steel ring anchoring the zip ties, a portion of the chair's arm guard, the edge of the medication sorting table, and the handle of the door leading into the corridor. These samples were compared against the University Medical Center personnel database and returned a 99.7% match with the DNA profile of pharmacist Mark Velen, who had previously been identified as one of the individuals with access to the pharmacy storage area and whose shift schedule aligned with periods of documented drug shortages. When the high match results appeared, the investigative team immediately placed Velen on the list of primary persons of interest and began analyzing his electronic device location data for the most recent 3 months to determine his current whereabouts. The system recorded that Velen's phone lost signal in the western Las Vegas area approximately 36 hours earlier, then reappeared with weak pings from a cell tower in the Pahrump, Nevada region. Since this area is more than an hour's drive from Las Vegas, and includes many lightly monitored secondary roads, the apprehension unit assessed that Velen might be attempting to leave his familiar place of residence. When traffic cameras along routes heading toward Pahrump were reviewed, captured images showed a silver SUV matching the vehicle registered in his name departing Las Vegas at night. No return signals were detected. The investigative team contacted the carrier to reanalyze device signals, and found that Velen's phone had produced sporadic pings in the outskirts of Pahrump near several private storage facilities. Authorities promptly submitted a request for support from the Clark County SWAT unit to prepare for an armed apprehension operation, given that the Henderson crime scene characteristics indicated the potential for dangerous coercive behavior. While SWAT prepared for deployment, the financial investigation team gathered Velen's asset records and identified multiple payments related to the rental of transport vehicles, diesel fuel, and generator maintenance. Several cash transactions in the Pahrump area coincided with the times his phone signal reappeared. Bank records showed unusual cash withdrawals during the final 2 weeks before Rebecca was found, suggesting Velen may have been preparing to relocate. As SWAT approached Pahrump, they coordinated with surveillance units to monitor the SUV at a mobile home park located far from the town center. Surveillance cameras recorded a man exiting the SUV and entering a small warehouse-like structure behind the property. The surveillance team confirmed the individual's build matched Velen based on height and gait data from his personnel file. After obtaining the required search and arrest warrants, SWAT executed a nighttime approach to minimize the subject's chance of escape. They used thermal imaging equipment and confirmed only one human heat signature inside the structure. When the team breached the side door of the small warehouse, they found Velen gathering small cardboard boxes containing glass vials and blister packs of medication. Near where he stood was a partially open safe containing multiple bundles of drugs matching the types recovered as evidence at Henderson. Velen was taken into custody without resistance. After he was handcuffed and removed, SWAT handed the subject over to the Special Investigative Unit. During the search of the Pahrump warehouse, forensic personnel discovered a significant quantity of items related to drug diversion, including a cutting torch used for sawing locks, a set of tools for obscuring manufacturing codes, a pill repackaging machine used to reseal blister packs, and numerous counterfeit drug labels bearing codes similar to the lots reported missing from UMC. On a small wooden table, the investigative team recovered a notebook containing color code markings and a list of medication batches noted with small dash symbols rather than letters or numbers. These symbols were cross-referenced with UMC pharmacy shortage data and showed matches across multiple drug groups. Inside the safe, in addition to the drugs, the team found a collection of documents including warehouse lease agreements with a shell company that had previously appeared in the Henderson warehouse contracts. Among the papers was an invoice for the purchase of a roll-pin core lock set 3 years earlier from an industrial hardware store in Las Vegas. The product code matched the type of lock installed at the Henderson warehouse and corresponded to the key recovered from Rebecca. A nylon bag containing more than $18,000 in cash was also found, along with 3 unactivated SIM cards, 2 walkie-talkies, and a backup phone. Under the table, forensic personnel discovered a small bag containing fragments of light blue rubber gloves, similar to those found at Henderson, as well as an unused zip tie. All items were sealed as evidence. Vellen's SUV was also searched. In the rear cargo area was a large rubber mat, bearing long abrasion marks, similar to the drag streaks documented in the Henderson warehouse. A spare key of the same type as the one recovered from Rebecca was found under the driver's seat. Dust samples collected from the vehicle mat matched the reddish-brown color of the dust at Henderson. All of these items were transferred into the evidence storage system for further analysis. After completing the search, authorities compiled an inventory of assets seized from Vellen, including cash, drug distribution equipment, spare locks and keys, warehouse lease contracts, unlabeled pharmaceutical containers, label forging tools, communication devices, and the SUV. All evidence data was documented in the investigative report to support prosecution related to the drug diversion source and illegal transportation activities. After being arrested in Pahrump and transferred to the Metro Interrogation Center, Mark Vellen was required to provide information related to the drug diversion activities, the origin of evidence recovered from the warehouses, as well as the suspected chain of behavior connected to Rebecca Sloan and Michelle Ortega. In the first interrogation session, Mark admitted to participating in diverting opioids onto the black market by manipulating quantities in the internal distribution batches at UMC. When explaining the operational mechanism, Mark described that he would typically use his pharmacy warehouse access to check out a batch at the correct quantity, then separately remove a few boxes, creating small but consistent discrepancies across multiple shifts. The removed boxes were transported by box truck to the Henderson warehouse, where they were resorted, batch codes removed, repackaged, and then distributed through consumption networks. When investigators asked about motive, Mark replied that the primary goal was profit, since the small amounts diverted were sufficient to avoid detection while still providing a steady supply. During his statement, Mark claimed that Rebecca was not entirely a victim but part of the operation, according to him. He asserted that Rebecca was fully aware of his quantity adjustments and had signed off on dispensing documents that contained discrepancies. However, when investigators compared this statement against the physical evidence and data confirming Rebecca's confinement conditions, the information Mark provided did not match. Medical records showed Rebecca suffered from prolonged malnutrition, exhibited signs of being restrained, restricted light exposure, and lacked the ability to move freely for an extended period. Rebecca's own statements reflected a state of coercion, and the psychological report confirmed she displayed specific responses characteristic of a victim under duress. Investigators continued to press Mark to clarify why Rebecca was found in the Henderson warehouse in such a debilitated state. Mark initially evaded the question, but after repeated demands for information, he admitted to having kept Rebecca confined in the warehouse for a prolonged period. When asked for the reason, Mark said he believed Rebecca had started to become unreliable and posed a risk of exposing the drug diversion operation. Therefore, he decided to remove her from the hospital environment. Mark described that confining Rebecca was not planned from the beginning. He claimed it was an unavoidable action. When cross-referenced with the evidence inside the Henderson warehouse, the investigation team noted numerous indicators that the confinement setup was systematic, including a fixed chair, zip ties, sorting table, and signs of continuous generator use. When asked to explain the existence of these structures, Mark stated that he did not build everything himself but had assistance from another man. When providing information about this individual, Mark described him as someone who had previously worked in the transportation industry and possessed skills in repair and warehouse reinforcement. Mark stated that this man was directly responsible for supervising Rebecca during the initial phase and was the one who regularly carried out control, restraint, intimidation, and monitoring of her. When investigators asked for a name, Mark provided a name he claimed was only used in transactions and said he did not know the real surname. Nevertheless, Mark described the man's appearance, height, gait, and the vehicle he typically used when coming to the warehouse. Details about the vehicle were recorded for cross-referencing with traffic camera data. During the interrogation, when Michelle Ortega was mentioned, Mark did not deny her presence in the warehouse. After being shown DNA matches from multiple surfaces, Mark stated that Michelle had been drawn into sorting medications, but did not cooperate and caused incidents. He described Michelle being injured during an attempt to escape. When investigators demanded confirmation of Michelle's final condition, Mark said she did not leave the warehouse alive. When asked about the disposal of the body, Mark repeated only that the assisting man was the one who handled any problems. When investigators compared this information with the locations of bloodstains in the Henderson warehouse, Mark did not deny it. He also stated that after the incident involving Michelle, certain items in the warehouse were rearranged, including moving large containers to the back and welding over a dented section of wall. Authorities recorded the statement but did not confirm its accuracy. When asked about the industrial key, Mark said only he and the assisting man kept copies. Rebecca's statement about picking up the key from the floor prompted investigators to demand Mark explain why the key was present in the room. He claimed it was possible the man had carelessly dropped it while entering to check. When investigators pointed out the match between Henderson dust samples and dust on Mark's work jacket captured on UMC camera footage, he did not dispute it. To verify the role of the assisting man, Mark described how this person typically approached the warehouse through the rear door, never using the main roll-up door. He said the man knew how to resecure the roll-up lock system without leaving scratches. These details were documented for technical lock comparison. Regarding the accusations against Rebecca, Mark continued to insist she knew more than she was saying. However, when investigators asked why, if Rebecca were an accomplice, she was held in extremely harsh conditions, Mark could not provide a reasonable explanation. His responses became contradictory, including claims that she threatened to report misconduct while simultaneously saying she was part of the diversion. The investigating agency recorded this statement but did not use it to contradict the physical evidence showing Rebecca was under coercion. When asked about the medication sorting process in the warehouse, Mark described that the assisting man was the one who managed restraint. He stated that this individual had previously worked with other distribution networks and helped Mark access transportation means to move the drugs out of Henderson. This was the first point at which Mark acknowledged a deeper connection between himself and the unidentified man. Mark's statements were audio recorded, transcribed, and entered into the evidence file for further analysis. When all DNA samples, camera footage, crime scene maps, and evidence collected from both the Henderson warehouse and the location where Mark Vellon was apprehended were entered into the integrated analysis system, Metro's interagency investigative group began reconstructing the sequence of events to fully establish the context of the captivity and forced labor operation. The 3D data model, combined with biological examination results, showed the presence of three main DNA sources in the warehouse: Rebecca Sloan, Michelle Ortega, and Mark Vellon. Mark's DNA was found on the fixed chair, anchor rings, door handles, table edges, and positions the investigation identified as control or coercion points. Rebecca's DNA was concentrated in the dark room, on the ribbed floor surfaces, at the bent metal hook, and in the area she described crawling through under the roll-up door. Michelle's DNA appeared on zip ties, the sorting table edge, broken items, and the blood streak near the generator shield plate. This distribution allowed the spatial analysis team to assign specific functions to different areas of the warehouse: the dark room for keeping bodies in an immobilized state, the fixed table area for forcing medication sorting, and the restraint chair section for physical control of victims. Traffic camera footage from routes passing through Henderson, combined with automatic license plate reader data, showed the metal box truck associated with Vellon appearing at the warehouse area multiple times during nighttime hours, coinciding with the periods when Rebecca and Michelle lost contact according to police records. When cross-referenced with Vellon's phone location data, the analysis group identified significant overlap. Every instance of his phone pinging near Henderson fell within timeframes when the warehouse showed unusual lighting or heavy generator activity, as recorded in diesel fuel purchase logs from local stations. Evidence recovered from Pahrump added further depth to the model. The notebook with color code markings matched the pharmaceutical labels found in the Henderson warehouse. The code-obscuring tools corresponded to faint scratch marks on box shells at the warehouse, and the water bottle carrying Michelle's DNA reinforced the likelihood that Michelle had been moved internally within the warehouse, consistent with the bloodstain location. When this evidence was fed into the spatial behavior analysis software, the reconstructed model depicted a closed cycle in which victims were brought into the dark room, held at the restraint chair, forced to sort medication, then moved to another area when they could no longer continue the coerced task. Abrasion marks on the floor and displaced dust streaks were simulated by the system as movement paths of the supervising subject, showing Mark's continuous presence in the role of warehouse operator. Faint footprints recovered at the edge of the roll-up door, while insufficient for positive identification, matched the shoe size and shape recorded on UMC camera footage when Mark moved through the hospital pharmacy area. When tracing the diverted drug flow through financial systems, the Criminal Economics Analysis Group identified multiple cash deposits by Mark, with timing and amounts consistent with the quantities of medication reported missing from UMC storage. Transaction reports showed a series of low-value but regular cash deposits during the periods when drug lots went missing. This data was cross-checked against Henderson warehouse operating costs, fuel expenses, and rental fees. These expenditures matched almost exactly with the illegal revenue generated from diverted drugs. When this money flow was charted into a graph, the model clearly revealed three branches: truck transport costs, warehouse maintenance costs, and payments to a second man assisting in victim guarding. Mark's DNA placement throughout the warehouse, the lock and key match, metal dust traces on Mark's clothing, and the Pahrump evidence reinforced the operational structure of the network. Older UMC camera segments, when processed with brightness enhancement software, showed Mark appearing in the medication storage area during multiple off-duty timeframes. Combined with keycard access logs, the investigative team constructed a timeline chart demonstrating overlap between drug shortage events and Mark's presence in the pharmacy storage. Rebecca did not appear in any video segments or system logs indicating participation in unauthorized medication retrieval. Administrative records showed signatures in Rebecca's name on falsified dispensing documents, lacked digital signature confirmation. Most were manually entered by someone with data editing privileges. Signature analysis confirmed the handwriting was not Rebecca's. Medical records indicated Rebecca had been held for at least more than 1 year, with severe malnutrition and extreme light deprivation, ruling out any possibility that she participated in running or assisting the drug diversion operation. Her abnormally healed injuries, ligature marks, and stress indicators were consistent with coerced captivity. When cross-referenced with the timeline of her disappearance and confinement traces, the analysis model concluded Rebecca could not have moved freely or participated in any cooperative activity. The fact that Mark's DNA appeared at all critical points in the warehouse, while Rebecca's DNA was only present at restricted locations, reinforced the role division. Mark as the operator of the coercive activity, Rebecca as the victim. This data was incorporated into the comprehensive report, strengthening and completely eliminating any prior suspicion about Rebecca's possible involvement in the network, rendering it indefensible against statements attempting to implicate Rebecca as a co-offender. The probability matching software concluded that the model was 100% consistent with Rebecca being coerced, with no indication of voluntary participation in any drug diversion-related behavior. After synthesizing all image data, DNA results, physical evidence, money flows, access logs, and the reconstructed crime scene model, authorities prepared a report emphasizing that Rebecca Sloan was a victim in the case and that no evidence supported her being a co-conspirator. After completing the investigation file and compiling all physical, biological, and financial evidence related to the activities of confinement, forced labor, and illegal drug diversion, the Clark County Prosecutor's Office prepared the official indictment against Mark Vellon. The indictment lists multiple charges, including first-degree kidnapping for the prolonged confinement of Rebecca Sloan, assault with a deadly weapon based on the restraint devices and documented injuries, drug diversion, and tampering with controlled substances for the actions of altering medication quantities, removing batch codes, and unauthorized transport, possession of equipment for manufacturing or repackaging controlled substances, manslaughter in connection with the death of Michelle Ortega based on DNA samples, bloodstains at the scene, and Mark's own statements, false imprisonment for holding victims in an enclosed environment without the ability to defend themselves, conspiracy arising from coordination with another unidentified individual who remains at large, along with additional charges related to misuse of leased property. After the indictment was filed with the court, the first hearing was held to determine pretrial detention and bail amount. The prosecutor argued that the level of danger and Mark's flight risk were high, citing the fact that he was arrested in Pahrump while preparing to move evidence and assets. Defense counsel countered that Mark had a stable work history at UMC, no prior violent record, and that his initial statements demonstrated a degree of cooperation. The judge reviewed all submitted materials, including DNA results, crime scene maps, illicit financial flows, and evidence recovered from the Henderson warehouse, and Pahrump then ruled to hold Mark without bail pending trial. During the pretrial preparation phase, defense counsel moved to suppress certain evidence, arguing that aspects of the search process were improper, particularly regarding the seizure of Mark's phone data and financial transactions. The prosecution opposed the motion, stating that all search warrants had been court-approved and that DNA samples were collected according to standard protocol. The court confirmed the evidence was lawfully obtained and permitted its presentation to the jury. When opening arguments began, the prosecution presented documentation outlining Mark's operational chain, including access to the UMC pharmacy warehouse, transport of discrepant medication batches, use of the Henderson warehouse as a resorting point, and the confinement of Rebecca Sloan. The prosecution cited medical reports showing Rebecca suffered severe malnutrition, vitamin D deficiency, and injuries around the wrists and ankles consistent with prolonged use of zip ties, asserting that this condition could not be the result of voluntary behavior. When addressing Michelle Ortega, the prosecution introduced DNA analysis found across multiple areas of the Henderson warehouse and matching blood samples near the generator, along with Mark's statement that Michelle did not leave the warehouse. This evidence was used to establish the elements supporting the manslaughter charge. Defense counsel attempted to mitigate by arguing that the DNA traces did not prove a timeline and that Mark had a subjective belief that Rebecca had been involved in falsifying documents. However, the prosecution rebutted by presenting camera data showing no footage of Rebecca performing any medication dispensing. Simultaneously, system records confirmed that digital signatures on the discrepant batches did not belong to Rebecca, but were manually entered by an account with edit privileges matching Mark's account. The jury was shown a three-dimensional reconstruction of the Henderson warehouse, with the locations of the restraint chair, anchor hooks, zip ties, sorting table, and exit paths marked in colors corresponding to DNA sources. The imagery demonstrated that Rebecca's presence was limited to restricted areas, while Mark's DNA appeared at operational or supervisory points. Regarding Michelle Ortega's death, the prosecution further presented her missing person file and the timing of her loss of contact, which coincided with warehouse operations. Michelle's family was called as witnesses to describe her condition prior to disappearing, providing information that Michelle had no connection to drug diversion activities and confirming that personal items recovered from the warehouse belonged to her. When questioned, Michelle's relatives described her personality, habits, and the fact that she had no history of traveling to the Henderson area, reinforcing that her DNA presence in the warehouse could not be explained by any legitimate reason. Rebecca Sloan was also subpoenaed to testify as a witness, not as a defendant. The prosecution issued an official statement affirming that Rebecca was not subject to criminal liability based on medical examination results, crime scene analysis, and her statements regarding the confinement process. During arguments, defense counsel attempted to assert that Mark had no intent to cause long-term harm and that Michelle's death was not proven by direct observation. The prosecution immediately countered with forensic analysis of bloodstains, DNA, floor indentations, and Mark's own statements, demonstrating that Michelle had been confined and subjected to force sufficient to cause injury. The court allowed this evidence to be used in establishing culpability for the manslaughter charge. Financial records showed Mark received multiple cash payments from unidentified sources during the same periods as the diverted medication batches. The prosecution argued that this illicit cash flow was directly linked to the drug diversion activity and was used to pay for the warehouse lease, generator, sorting equipment, and transportation costs. Accounting records from the truck rental business confirmed that Mark rented vehicles on the exact dates when Henderson camera footage showed box trucks entering and exiting. Upon concluding their presentation, the prosecution emphasized the structured chain of conduct: unauthorized acquisition of medications, confinement of personnel to compel labor, use of violence during coercion, and resulting death to another victim. All evidentiary components were submitted to the court file in full and cross-referenced meticulously, providing the foundation for the trial of the serious charges against Mark Vellon. The sentencing hearing for Mark Vellon was held at the United States District Court for the District of Nevada, under the observation of prosecution representatives, the investigative team, victims' families, and legal oversight agencies. When the judge entered the courtroom, the entire thick indictment containing the charges of first-degree kidnapping, assault with a deadly weapon, drug diversion, tampering with controlled substances, manslaughter in connection with Michelle Ortega, false imprisonment, and conspiracy was read aloud for the record before the final sentence was imposed. The prosecutor presented a consolidated summary of evidence, including DNA data collected from the Henderson warehouse, the reconstructed crime scene map, financial analysis showing the flow of illicit funds, camera footage capturing vehicle movements, Mark's own confirmed statements regarding his role in the opioid diversion network, and testimony related to the captivity of Rebecca Sloan and Michelle Ortega. The judge requested a review of Rebecca's medical examination report, the documentation of her physical injuries, and prolonged malnutrition, to determine the element of coercion. When moving to the content concerning Michelle, the prosecution presented DNA evidence collected from zip ties, the table edge, the blood streak near the generator, and hair samples found in floor seams, cited as sufficient grounds to establish that Michelle had been present and seriously harmed at the Henderson warehouse. The jury had previously unanimously determined that these elements met the criteria for manslaughter under federal law. Defense counsel attempted to present mitigating arguments, claiming that Mark had no intent to cause death and that the incident occurred unintentionally, but the prosecution countered with excerpts from statements Mark had provided, in which he admitted Michelle was injured during supervision and that she never left the warehouse. This evidence was accepted as a direct contributing factor to the offense. In the portion addressing responsibility toward Rebecca, the judge issued an official court document affirming that Rebecca Sloan had no criminal involvement in the case. This document was based on the absence of any evidence in the record confirming her participation in drug diversion, combined with forensic reports clearly demonstrating coercive conditions. This section was entered into the trial transcript to ensure no future criminal charges would be brought against Rebecca in connection with the case. After hearing presentations from both sides, the judge proceeded to read the final judgment. Based on the structure of the charges and the severity of the conduct, the court sentenced Mark Vellon to a combined total of 58 years in federal prison, consisting of 35 years for kidnapping, 10 years for drug diversion and tampering with controlled substances, 8 years for manslaughter in connection with Michelle Ortega, and 5 years for conspiracy, along with related charges of false imprisonment and use of facilities for unlawful purposes. No possibility of early parole during the first 25 years. When announcing the sentence, the judge emphasized that holding a medical professional captive to serve criminal operations constituted highly dangerous conduct involving multiple elements of violence and resulting in severe consequences. The next portion of the sentencing hearing addressed the rights of Michelle's family. The prosecution representative requested that the court consider restitution for damages caused by the manslaughter offense, including search costs, emotional harm, and civil damages under Nevada law for cases involving a victim's death. The court reviewed the submitted file and confirmed the completeness of the documentation provided by Michelle's family. Based on the extent of the harm and the circumstances of the case, the court ordered Mark Vellon to pay a total of $1.1 million in restitution to the family of Michelle Ortega. This amount included compensation for loss, legal expenses, and an additional civil penalty to ensure the defendant's accountability for the resulting consequences. Regarding income unlawfully obtained through drug diversion, the court ordered the forfeiture of all related assets, including cash recovered in Pahrump, equipment used in the reclassification of medications, the SUV used for transportation, and all financial documents connected to the network. These assets were transferred to federal authorities for disposal in accordance with regulations governing criminal proceeds. Once the judgment was fully read, the judge directed the court clerk to prepare the final record, closing the entire case at the federal level, confirming that the investigation, prosecution, and trial processes had been completed. The legal proceedings against Mark Vellon were deemed concluded, with all evidence, testimony, and exhibits archived in the National Records System pursuant to federal criminal case management statutes. Mark Vellon was ordered to be transferred directly to a high-security federal correctional facility. Decisions concerning restitution, asset forfeiture, and victims' rights were also entered into the Nevada state legal system to ensure enforcement. The court declared the hearing concluded when no further requests remained from the prosecution, the defendant, or representatives of the victims' families. After the verdict was issued for Mark Vellon and the entire legal proceedings concluded, Rebecca Sloan was transferred to Denver to begin a long-term PTSD treatment program at a specialized center for psychological recovery of victims of prolonged confinement. There, doctors analyzed her avoidance responses to confined spaces, fear of metal sounds, and chronic insomnia, then developed a treatment plan that included controlled exposure therapy, cognitive therapy, and continuous evaluation sessions aimed at reducing neural activation levels whenever Rebecca encountered stimuli related to her confinement period. The treatment record noted slow but steady progress, with indicators such as heart rate during triggers gradually decreasing, ability to maintain sleep improving, and frequency of panic responses declining. Alongside the treatment process, Rebecca was invited by the FBI to provide information for an expanded case file related to a drug diversion network extending beyond Nevada. Rebecca's interviews at the Denver Center were recorded on video, during which she described in detail the forced medication sorting process, the structure of the Henderson warehouse, and the involvement of the man who assisted Mark. This information was forwarded by the FBI to investigative units in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado to review abandoned industrial facilities with similar characteristics. Numerous warehouse maps and dust sample data from other states were sent to Rebecca for cross-referencing of sound sources, dark room shapes, and floor structures in order to identify suspicious locations. In addition, Rebecca participated in tracing the post-Henderson drug transportation chain based on her observations of colors and labels affixed to cardboard boxes. These comparisons helped the FBI follow batches of medication that had been moved through Arizona by box trucks matching the type captured on camera in Mark's file. While Rebecca continued her therapy, her family in Las Vegas readjusted their lives after years of lost contact and the strain of the investigation process. They received support from victim assistance organizations to stabilize mental health, reestablish family routines, and address issues arising from the loss of income during Rebecca's disappearance. The family also participated in several working sessions with health authorities to improve security systems at UMC, the original site of the disappearance. Several reports were produced to identify improvements needed in pharmacy warehouse access procedures, including mandatory biometric scanning and increased camera coverage in the staff parking lot. Within this series of changes, the Las Vegas medical community and major hospitals in the region held numerous discussions about the risk of healthcare workers being targeted for exploitation in drug diversion networks. Hospitals introduced mandatory two-person presence during pharmacy access shifts, along with oversight of medication shortage handling by an independent department, rather than relying solely on a single inventory pharmacist. Regarding the Henderson warehouse facility, after the examination and evidence collection were completed, the site was sealed under federal order. Technical teams dismantled interior equipment, including the fixed chair, anchor hooks, partition walls, and generator. The property was handed over to Henderson city authorities for consideration of disposal as crime-related real estate. The community raised numerous proposals demanding complete demolition of the warehouse, to prevent it from becoming a site of trauma or attracting curiosity seekers. When Henderson authorities held public meetings on the land's future use, representatives from healthcare organizations, victim advocacy groups, and local residents requested that the area be converted into a safe public space or an official storage facility to prevent any reuse for illegal purposes. Portions of the case file, including crime scene photos and warehouse structure maps, were used in FBI training courses on identifying unauthorized confinement facilities. This was intended to help law enforcement units recognize patterns of warehouses combined with forced labor linked to drug diversion. In addition, a new alert network was implemented among major hospitals in the Western region to monitor anomalies in medication management systems, aiming for early detection of discrepancies similar to the pattern that occurred at UMC. While in Denver, Rebecca maintained limited contact with investigative functions. Doctors required all FBI interviews to be shortened and to avoid triggering panic responses. Sessions focused solely on information Rebecca volunteered to describe, without requiring reenactment of images or sounds from her confinement period. Treatment notes indicated Rebecca had the capacity to reintegrate into the community, but would need many years to stabilize psychologically. The treatment center developed a long-term roadmap with quarterly evaluation milestones and a program to train reflex control skills when encountering stimuli resembling the warehouse environment. Michelle Ortega's family continued to participate in legal meetings related to compensation. They did not join the investigation because the court process had concluded, but they collaborated with victim support organizations to establish a monitoring program for abandoned industrial facilities in Henderson. Certain pieces of evidence no longer holding legal value were transferred to police training units for risk identification training. Final case summary reports were archived in the federal system, becoming reference material in internal healthcare security training courses. The medical community in Las Vegas and Henderson added this case to the list of required improvements in personnel control procedures, especially for employees with pharmacy warehouse access. Some hospitals established random medication dispensing checks and mandatory independent quarterly audits. In Denver, Rebecca's recovery process was recorded as the focus of interdisciplinary meetings between the therapy team and the FBI to ensure that all interactions with authorities did not interfere with treatment. When the center released its latest report, Rebecca was described as gradually adapting to normal life, capable of independent movement within the treatment facility grounds and participating in group activities for survivors of prolonged confinement. At the same time, the medical community continued implementing reform guidelines to reduce the risk of similar incidents, while the Henderson warehouse remained sealed pending the city's final disposal decision. In the story of Rebecca Sloan, details that might seem to belong only to an isolated case clearly reflect many existing issues in contemporary American life, from security gaps in the healthcare system, the crushing pressure on frontline workers, to the way organized crime exploits fatigue and internal trust to operate illegal networks. Rebecca's abduction right in the UMC Las Vegas staff parking lot after her 1:47 a.m. shift serves as a reminder that the work environment of healthcare staff, though considered safe, still carries risks if key areas such as internal exits and the pharmacy warehouse lack proper monitoring. Small but persistent medication batch discrepancies over many months, once dismissed as administrative errors, opened the door to a large-scale opioid diversion operation, reflecting the reality that the United States continues to confront the opioid crisis and that criminal networks often begin from very small cracks. Rebecca was held for more than 2 years, severely malnourished, deprived of light, bearing persistent restraint marks. These details show that victims of organized crime can be completely isolated from traditional reporting systems. If community, colleagues, and family do not maintain close contact, a disappearance can stretch to unimaginable lengths. Michelle Ortega's death further underscores the brutality of dark activities in abandoned industrial environments, places the community often overlooks because they seem unrelated to us. The lesson for Americans today lies not only in personal vigilance but in building stronger community oversight, not ignoring small discrepancies in systems, proactively reporting anomalies, demanding transparency in healthcare processes, and caring about the safety of those working in vulnerable conditions. Rebecca's story reminds us that protecting one person can sometimes mean protecting an entire system from abuse. If you are interested in stories of justice and the power of survival like Rebecca Sloan's journey, please hit subscribe to join us in the next videos. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next stories where we continue to shine light on the truth and protect the community.